Well, the country's future submarine fleet could be powered by nuclear energy. Australia's Navy Chief Vice Admiral Mike Noonan has left the possibility open after saying he'll keep a close eye on developing technologies. To discuss this further is spokesperson for Submarines Australia, Gary Johnston, who joins me now. Gary, let's take people back a little bit, because you were part of a business consortium, senior Australian business people who were concerned about the way in which the proposal to build 12 new boats in Australia was developed and whether or not that was a good use of taxpayers' money, the type of boat chosen, where it was built, sustainment policies, which is maintenance for people at home that don't follow all the submarine politics very closely. Take us back through your involvement from the start on this issue.
Peter, thank you for having me on. Yes, we were concerned from 2016 when the announcement was made that there was basically seen to be a plan to convert a nuclear submarine to a diesel submarine, and the contract was given to a French military shipbuilding consortium. We thought the whole idea was absolutely cockeyed compared to the previous fiasco that the government got involved in trying to convert helicopter chassis that had been sitting in the Arizona desert since the 60s into modern anti-submarine warfare helicopters. That failed, and we just thought this is just a bigger potential failure. The government has basically ignored us on this because there's just nowhere for the government to go. The realities are just starting to impinge upon the general public, and we formed a consortium called Submarines For Australia that we set up to basically keep the government honest on this. It's very interesting that since 2016, when there was just no talk of nuclear submarines, we've always believed that the nuclear submarine option was much better for Australia, considering the vast distances involved. The diesel submarines are based in HMAS Stirling in Perth in Western Australia, and for them to go to their patrol area, which is in the South China Sea, they've basically got to transit for about a month. The Collins-class submarine is basically a fuel tank with a submarine on the end of it. That's because they have to burn so much diesel fuel to get to their station. If you replace the Collins-class with a nuclear submarine, you can get there in about a quarter of the time. A diesel submarine will run at about 4 knots on batteries underwater, and the bulk of the time they spend underwater, you can walk at about a brisk pace of 3 knots. So you can imagine walking from Perth up to north of New Guinea, how long that would take. That's what the submarine's basically doing. A nuclear submarine, on the other hand, can do about 30 knots underwater, and it can get there in no time. In fact, it can get there so fast, you need about half the submarine fleet that a diesel fleet would require to maintain boats on station all the time. It even makes sense from a logistics point of view to go to a nuclear submarine. And it's very interesting that Mike Noonan has actually made this comment about that the Navy should consider moving to nuclear submarines down the track, whatever that means. He's not saying much, but he's the first time a government official has actually mentioned the possibility of a nuclear option. So I suppose I should be happy that at least they're now talking the N-word, and that's a very welcome development.
I guess my worry with all of this, and you know, to disclose my interest, I was involved at the start of the process prior to the decision being taken by the Turnbull government to go with a French build. But we're talking about a French nuclear class of submarine that's not even in existence now, being retrofitted and made a conventional submarine or a diesel-powered submarine for Australia's circumstances, which is the sort of mess we got ourselves into with the Collins class, in that we built an orphan-type device that no one else in the world has. And, of course, when we have all the problems with it, we are the guinea pigs. Well, we're trying to do that again with the complexity of a nuclear sub becoming conventional to Australia, when, as you say, in strategic and other operational terms, would be far better off to be taking what we know or we're hoping is going to work in a nuclear sub, not making all of these changes, making sure, however, it does all the things we want it to do for our region, our increasingly difficult region, and saving us, I think, the Australian taxpayer, quite a lot of enormous risk here.
That's exactly right. The idea of the orphan, as you say, is very dear to the heart of the Defence Department. They walk along the supermarket shelves of all the world's military providers and go, I'd like that, but I'd like 2 fins on the end rather than 1 fin. They are absolutely silly in not choosing to buy off-the-shelf military hardware that's tried, tested and proven and comes with a warranty. The French make a pretty good nuclear submarine, and I'm sure they'd be delighted if we woke up to ourselves, came to our senses and simply ordered the French nuclear submarine, because it's already built, it sits on a slipway, and we could have it within 10 years. They take a while to make.
We've got allies. We've got other allies, as you know, that use nuclear, so we could be getting them from elsewhere, not just the French. But this has been, I think this has been the missed debate. It's run by politicians, let's be very honest, who didn't want to talk about nuclear, who wanted to pork barrel into South Australia, so there were geographic constraints and workforce constraints about where we put the build. And of course, we didn't really want to have to take anything that was built offshore. So we've constrained ourselves quite enormously, I think. And I, am pleased to see, or I hope we'll see continue, comments from the Chief of Navy that are common sense.
Exactly. Look, you're starting to see the pork barrelling in Western Australia now around Fremantle. They're chasing the maintenance contracts for the submarine. Look, I find the whole thing of sacrificing the quality submarine for a few shabby pay packets in Adelaide as something very, very beneath our dignity. It really is. We don't buy Mercedes-Benzes that are made in Adelaide. We don't. The South Australians don't even build their wind turbines in Adelaide. They buy them from the Danish and the Germans. And yet, for some reason or other, the most complicated mechanical device on the planet can be made in South Australia. Excuse me. Why don't they make wind turbines in Adelaide? Because they know they couldn't make them at a competitive price. But with government expenditure, of course, all bets are out the window.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to leave it there before I start getting turned off in Adelaide. But, there is a lot of truth in what you say, Gary. Thanks very much for your time tonight. And please keep up the pressure, because I think your mob are partly responsible for the fact I think there's some realism creeping into this debate after some time in its absence. Thanks for your time tonight.